did start the company, so.
He did, huh? Wait, your granddad did?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. He started.
How do you think, well, hold on now. How do you think his upbringing, meaning dirt floor, Decatur, Illinois, hustle and pool till he gets in trouble, goes in the Army, gets in trouble, plays cards. How do you think that translates in any way to the real estate game?
It's a good question. I think, well, I know. Yesterday I sat down to talk with my good friend Mike about heritage real estate, and as you probably know, my wife and I were married September 12th, a couple weeks ago, and so he asked me about the wedding, and as he did, we talked about my grandfather, and what many people don't know is on the same day my wife and I were married, my grandfather passed away. So we talked a lot yesterday about his impact on me over the years, his impact on Heritage brand, and what he meant to us as a couple. And Jackie Gleason. Mm-hmm. Jackie Gleason was Minnesota Fats.
Right.
Tozier's was Minnesota Fats home pool tables.
Okay.
So my grandfather learned to play pool and gamble from Minnesota Fats.
That's
like,
awesome.
Kind of took him under his wing. Then he got in trouble, right? Because the Great Depression was going on. He was basically shooting pool for, $3, $4 a game. His dad's working in the factory, the foundry, for like 10 cents a day.
Right.
And they're over there, and basically got himself in trouble. Not exactly sure, how much trouble you get in, but gambling trouble in Decatur.
Right.
And joined the Army as a way to kind of like get out of it. Joins the Army and ends up in the Army, and then is in the Army for 20 some years, 25 years. And rather than play pool, obviously he did, but got into playing poker, and then ran all the poker rooms in the Army. I get these letters, him sending back money, he's writing here, he's like working for whatever, but he's making more money playing pool, or playing poker, and sending that cash back to my grandmother back in Illinois. Fucking crazy.
That's wild.
Like all this shit. So then that's when he retired. He retired and then went to go to Vegas. He always played poker, even when COVID happened and essentially the poker rooms closed, he started playing online. Like the guy learned how to play poker, online poker,
And he's making money his whole life.
Playing poker. That was like, he made more playing poker than he would with his Army retirement, and his pension, and his, Social Security. Like that would be his party money. It was like, cash, Yeah, it was.
What did he play? Do you remember?
He played, like Texas Hold'em, the 5 card, where they.
You get 2 cards in your hand.
Yeah, and then
3,
and then 5, right? 5 card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2 more. Whatever the tournament game is.
Yeah.
Whatever they play
Texas
in the, I think it's Texas Hold'em, right? Mm-hmm. I think because he would always say, like, I actually got one of his letters there. He would always say, like, don't play. He never really played. He never really gambled. He never looked at it. He'd always play tournaments.
Right.
Like, he's like, I don't gamble. I'm a tournament player. So you end up entering a $500. It's a $500 buy-in, but it's a $5,000 winnings or something. Sure. He's like, so if I lose $500. If I win, and a lot of times the regional tournaments, it would get down to 2 players.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's in the money.
And they're like, you know what? We'll just split the pot. Like, let's just split it. Like, rather than play another 10 hours.
Yep.
So that's what he ended up doing. That's how he played it.
That's wild.
Crazy. Yeah, he was the pro. He was the pro for the Sands before they blew up the Sands.
Vegas.
In Vegas. And then he went to the Mirage because the guys went over there. And then after that, he originally, when he like...
How does that even work? They pay him to...
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So for all the high roller tables and celebrity players, people that like to play the game, each casino will have a handful of pros that they basically pay you, minimum wage essentially, but then they give you a set of chips, right? And say, okay, you're gonna play with this group, so they can play with a pro, and the game works, right? Like,
sure.
If you got like 5 people and
sometimes
3 guys don't know how to play the game, the game's not gonna be as good, right? So they wanna play with people that know the game. And so basically he'd make like whatever, $20 an hour, $15, whatever it was in Vegas. But his bonus was they give you a set of chips every day, and whatever you won, playing was yours. It was like your bonus pay. So you'd always walk home with a couple $100, $1,000, whatever. But yeah, he played with everybody. But all the high roller tables, the guys that want to like throw big money, they will oftentimes play with like a house pro at the table, unless they have a group that they're there with. But most of the time, say you get the house pro, and the house will always have a pro or two that play.
That's pretty crazy. It's an interesting life.
It's weird, yeah.
I know a buddy of mine who I shall remain nameless. Put himself through college
playing
poker.
Yeah. You make good money, man. If you know
what you're doing.
Yeah, you know the game.
I mean, something tells me he was a different type of player than your granddad. He's super nerdy, statistical guy.
Yeah.
So he kind of always was computing the odds in his head.
Right.
May or may not be a Division I coach right now, but yeah, and he applies a lot of the statistical analysis.
Oh yeah.
He learned in poker.
My grandfather was that way too. With the game.
Really?
Well, like a lot of like the game was life to him, like the odds and like things like calculated analysis of decisions.
Sure.
He was very much like that. Yeah. And the more you play, the more hands you have had behind your belt, the more you have seen these scenarios.
Yeah.
Even if you don't count the cards and know exactly, aren't necessarily that good or that intelligent, you get a rhythm with, okay, I've seen these hands.
You have data points to call upon.
Yeah. And where you're sitting and where the blind is, he would always tell me that makes a big difference. If you're the first, to act or the last to act, like you kind of get it, you'll change your strategy how that rolls around the table and stuff like that. But I mean, unfortunately, he was so good by the time I was of age,
right.
Even my dad, he rarely would teach us. One, no one taught him, right? So he's figure it out. Like you got to have a passion for it.
Yeah.
He just loved it.
Yeah.
But two, didn't have to he's not teaching you, But my buddy Yorgos, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe less, a year or two before COVID, they were living in Vegas, and he was playing at the Golden Nugget. Because he ended up buying a huge ranch out in Pahrump, and that's where they lived, kind of like Death Valley, and then still the Vegas side. So then he always played every day at the Nugget. Anyhow, Yorgos comes out, and he loved Yorgos, right? He's the Greek kid. Actually, I always wish one of these days I hope Yorgos, while we're all here, gets over here.
Sure.
He was a Greco guy.
Okay.
He was on the Olympic team for Greece.
Okay.
Stud. Kind of got screwed in China, but that's a different story for a different time. Anyways, he'd be great for Kikinu. He would probably, I don't know. It'd be good to see them.
Sure.
It'd be cool. But so one day Yorgos is at my grandpa's house, and he's like, "So, who's the best players you ever played with?" And he's like, "You mean of all time?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Well, Nicky the Greek was the most dynamic player. He would win big and lose big. He would bet big hands." He's like, "In fact, a lot of people don't know, but the reason there's limits on tables now in Las Vegas is because of Nicky the Greek." And then he named somebody else. He's like, this guy this is all old Vegas. This is Fremont Street.
Sure.
And he was like, somebody, I forget.
Just Fremont Street, no strip, no.
Yeah, I don't even think the strip even existed.
Right,
he's like, these guys were the best all-time players, right? And then he's like, name somebody. And then he's like, honestly, I'm too old. I can't remember the other two. And I don't know, a day later, Yorgos comes, he's like, "Do you think one of the other two was your grandfather?" I go, "I don't know. If it was, he wouldn't have said it anyways." But he's like, "Yeah, he didn't say anything." He's like, "I'm too old to remember who the other two were," And then he'd be like, after he got done telling the story, he was like, now with the online game, there's a lot of people are really good.
The pool becomes a lot bigger.
So there's so many great players, But anyhow, yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, it's a cool story, dude.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess we gotta talk about real estate too, huh?
Yeah. We might as well get into the real estate space and what's happening,
Not just the gambling space.
Yeah. He did start the company, so.
He did, huh? What, your granddad did?
Yeah. He started.
How do you think? Well, hold on now. How do you think his upbringing, and meaning dirt floor, Decatur, Illinois, hustle and pull till he gets in trouble, goes in the Army, gets in trouble, plays cards. How do you think that translates in any way to the real estate game?
It's a good question. I think, well, I know the chronological story. You know, he gets out of the Army in California, and essentially back then they would give him like a bus ticket, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, go back to Decatur. And he's like, no way.
Yeah.
I'm staying here. It's nice, right?
Have you seen Decatur?
Yeah, like it's
Thanks,
like I think I'll stay right here, you know, which I'm grateful because I'm born in California. But my grandmother would have been the person he had to call and be like, hey, I'm not, you know, and then Midwestern grandparents and Midwestern people in general, but definitely a Midwestern grandmother. I mean, they're as tough as they come, you know. It's like, you know, they're hard, sturdy. They're sturdy, you know. And I only could imagine the conversation, having known her for 40 years, 45 years, her saying, hell no, you're not staying in California without me. I'm coming out, you know. And so she comes out, and he started working with an Army buddy for a company called Mueller Fire Hydrants. And they were selling fire hydrants as the Los Angeles area was kind of developing and streets were developing.
What year is this?
I don't know.
Just guess.
After the Korean War. So a couple years after the Korean War. 50s, you know? Late, mid 50s probably, right in there. And so that's what got him into real estate, was seeing as these places were developing, he's essentially selling fire hydrants for whatever that was, and then realizing, well, geez, the people that are involved in the real estate are making way more money.
Sure.
Whether they're the buyer of the property or the land, or they're the seller of the land, how do I get involved? And you're a blue collar person, you know, from the Midwest, you know, you don't have the money to necessarily buy the lot, you know, but you could get your license and begin to sell it.
Sure.
And so that's where I think he first got the idea of being, hey, I'm going to be in real estate. I'm gonna be the person that helps with the transaction and therefore make a commission or a compensation for that. And then he's stuck in the East Los Angeles area, Diamond Bar, Chino, Pomona till he retired. And then my dad, you know, what's interesting is it became a family thing. My grandfather starts having success. Then my grandmother is like, well, look, if you can do it, I can do it, which was much what her personality was. So when I grew up, the first memories I have of being 4 years old is going into a Realty World office, which most people have never even heard of. They barely exist anymore, but they were really the first Cindent kind of brokerage, if you will, prior to Century 21, Coldwell Bankers.
Okay.
You know, my grandfather was the broker. You know, my grandmother was an agent there, and my dad was an agent there. So I would walk into this little Realty World office, and my whole family was in there, and they all had their desks, and they're all doing their business. And at that time, which was interesting, there wasn't the computer, so we still had the MLS. They still had these listings, but they would pull them off of like a book. It would be this huge book of all the land or homes that were available for sale and who was selling them. Right. And we'd go through them. And then I remember when we moved from that office, now I'm probably around junior high, you know, 6th, 7th grade, and the computer starts to come about, and they had one printer that they would print the listing book out. Instead, it used to just come out like the phone book. Right. And then it was like, you know, basically digitally, they could print it. And it was the old printers with the, you know, when you peel off the thing. You'd peel, like it'd print out the book. Dude, and so they would literally, my job as like the sixth grader, 7th grader, whatever time come, hey, go get that, pull it off, punch it, pull the sides off. There it is. It, you know, be that papered fold back and forth. You know, make sure it's all in one thing and get it out to the agents. You know, and at that time, you know, that was my first like, oh, this is cool. And then somewhere around high school, they started having me. So if you don't have a license, you can work in a real estate office and do non-licensed activity. Sure. And so I didn't know at the time this was like grunt work, but basically they would put me at the front desk and I would answer the phones, you know, for either potential buyers or sellers or people calling to talk to, you know, my dad I'd just sit there and answer phones, and I loved it, you know. It was cool. And I didn't know how much I absorbed as a young kid watching not only my dad, but my grandmother, my grandfather go on listing appointments or help buyers and sellers, and being in that industry and around it. I didn't know how much I had learned or had taken in, and how much I really like looked up to them,
Sure.
you know, for being professionals and helping people, you know, buy and sell homes. I mean, there'd be people that would come in and be like, you know, your dad, you know, helped us buy our dream home, you know, and you look back, you're like, oh, you know, at the time it didn't.
You just kind of schlep it off.
Yeah.
Right?
But
now,
as I got older, now I was like, you know, that's a really amazing blessing to be that part of someone's life.
Sure.
You know, to help them find the home that they raise their kids in, or the home they retire in, you know, or
whatever.
You know, to help them be a part of those transactions. It just, I you know, I went to college, you know, got an education there, and that was, my parents really pushed me to do that. Because they didn't do that,
right.
You know, they just went right into real estate, you know. But as I got into the real world, I kept going back to this industry as you know, as one that not only helped my family succeed, but also, you know, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy, to this day, I'm passionate about it. I really like it, and it's a constant learning, and as we've talked about before, that things are changing all the time.
Yeah,
and
sure. It's dynamic.
It's dynamic. It's never the same. But the fundamental principle, people buying a home or selling a home, has been the same for years.
Sure.
How we do it, technology, and all the different ancillary, you know, new things is just as it evolves into generation, you know, the next eras. But the basic principles have been the same, you know. And the other cool thing is home ownership. If you really like look at it from just a basic economic, the people that own their own home, their kids are better educated, you know, they're wealthier, you know, they're more stable.
Sure.
You know, there's so many other things that go into.
That's why they ask you if you're a homeowner on your insurance.
100%.
I mean, it's a very simple equation.
It really is, you know, and even as I've taken the steps in my life, you know, with my part, it's like when you have a home, you can build something, and you take pride in it. And I think, I mean, probably everyone who watches their parents be entrepreneurs or run their own business is absorbing, young kids are absorbing those things. But I was very lucky to not only, you know, see it, but like live it. And really, my entire family has been in the industry for 3 generations, you know.
Well, let's go back to your granddad then, and the original question. How does a life of the Army and gambling prepare you for what is essentially a corporate job?
Yeah.
How does that even happen?
I think he took the things, I think he took the discipline from the military, you know, that structure. I think that was part of, you know, the thing that attracted him was he was always the guy in the office. He was there first. He was the last to leave. You know, he was very much structured. And I think the gambling, the poker, you know, it is a game when you're negotiating a contract or negotiating for a client. You are playing a bit of poker. You are playing a bit of, you know, sometimes you're bluffing, sometimes you're showing your cards, and you have to know when and where to do those things. And you're doing it on behalf of a client, you know, sometimes his emotions. And I think that's the other thing poker taught him was he wasn't emotional about what is probably their client's most emotional decision. He was very even keeled. He just was always the same. And I think that was something that people really respected about him. You know, while, you know, he reminded me a lot of that, I'm gonna mess this up, but it was like Edgar Allan Poe or one of those poets, like when everyone's losing their cool, can you be calm and collective? I know I just butchered that, but it's something like that. And he was like that. He really loved the deal. He really loved the art of putting it together. And I think that's part of what he got from the game was, you know, putting together a hand. Sometimes you don't have the cards.
Yeah, sometimes you get dealt a 2-7 offsuit, and that's what you got to deal with.
You got to deal with it. And how you play it, you may win that hand when you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that in a lot of different ways, one in particular, sometimes you're working with, say, for example, a buyer who maybe isn't in the best position to buy this house, but that's the house they want. And you can negotiate and work on their behalf to get them into that house. And in a lot of ways, that's a hand you shouldn't have won. They shouldn't have gotten into that house, but you could get them into it by playing the game. And same thing with a seller. I mean, we're working with a seller now who, you know, the house is worth pretty close to what they owe. So they're not going to make a ton of money on this. And we, in representing them, I know this, right? And they've been fully open with me about it. But so I know exactly what we need to get for them to walk away from this property and make a little bit of money.
Sure.
It's not easy because it's not like it's $1 million home and they only owe 400.
Right.
It's like, you know, they owe right up. They bought it a year ago.
Right.
There hasn't been a lot of time for them to build up that equity. And so we're playing that game right now, actually, as we speak. And it reminds me a lot of watching my grandfather sit at the table and, hey, you know, you don't have the best hand, or, you know, you don't have a ton of chips. You know, how do you get some chips back into your pot?
So here's what's interesting to me about this whole scenario. Your granddad seems like the kind of guy that learned at a very young age to bet on himself, right? And so I say that because my family looks at me like I'm absolutely batshit crazy. They're like, you do things on Instagram? What? I don't get it. Like, and that's not just like my dad, who's 77. It's my sister, who's been a school teacher for 20 years. It's her husband, who's been a cop and has had a steady paycheck for the last 20 years. They look at what I do and they just go, they couldn't. Not that they couldn't, I'm sure they could, but they couldn't conceive just betting on yourself.
Right.
That has to apply to someone like your granddad.
100%. Yeah, 100%. You know, and I think every entrepreneur like yourself, when you run your own business, whether it's marketing, entertaining, real estate, you know, any of these entrepreneurial businesses that people start, you have to have a sense of it can get done. I can do it. This is right for me. You have to, you know, because you are going to have, and it would have been fun to ask him, you know, did he ever have doubts? You know, did he ever have these doubts? But he as far as I could observe and tell, he never did. He was very, like I said, composed.
Oh, no, he did.
Yeah.
100%
right.
he did.
Yeah.
I'm just here to tell you.
Yeah.
100% he had a ton of doubts.
But you never saw it.
Nope.
You know, and you know, you never, he was very unique, even in I would say even different than my dad in that way. My dad and I are probably a little more emotional. We show that a little more. He was very even keeled. And when things, I remember one time in particular, as I was starting the business, right? I mean, I've had my broker's license since 2003. I've been in the industry for a long time. But when I moved to San Diego and started Heritage South, I didn't have anything here. I didn't go to high school here. I didn't go to college here. I had a handful of friends and I was gonna build this business here. And I remember having a lot of fear and anxiety about it. And he said to me something that I've never forgotten. He said, Jeremy, the measure of a man is not how he responds when everything goes well in his life. That's easy. The measure of a person is how they respond when the chips are against them, when everything's going wrong, and how do they handle that? And that's always stuck with me, even when, you know, a transaction isn't going our way. It reminds me to that's where I need to be at my best. It's easy to be at our best when we're winning every match or everything's going, the ball's bouncing your way, you know, every deal's coming in your direction. It's a lot more difficult, and I think you can judge a person or understand the depth of a person better when things don't go their way. How do they respond? And that was something I think he did better than anybody. Yeah. And so even though, like you said, every entrepreneur has these moments of fear and doubt and insecurity and is this going to work? He was able to calm those things down and just do what he had to do.
Yeah.
And did it well. Did it well.
Yeah, he did.
You know?
We're gonna cut that.